we're going to go in and get started. It's 11:30. Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Paige Thacker, and I'm with Virginia Cooperative Extension. And hopefully you've enjoyed the morning presentation. We have lots of great speakers. Next on our list is Adrian Willing. And if somebody has some virtual participants as well, if somebody can unmute their mic and speak up and make sure we're good, you can hear us.
We can hear you.
I can hear you.
Awesome. Thank you. If you have questions, if you can hold them till the end, I will come back to the laptop at the end of the presentation and see if you guys have any questions.
And if anyone in virtual land wants a free scene packet for attending this course virtually, just come find me.
Okay.
I'll make sure you can get one.
Yeah, we'll okay, so we have Adrian Willing here. And Adrian is the owner and operator of Be American Plant Native LLC, an independent native landscaping consultancy located in Woodbridge since 2021. He's a Chesapeake Bay landscape professional, level 1, and is active with his local Prince William County Virginia Native Plant Society chapter, the Prince William Wildflower Society. Originally from Florida, Adrian's journey into the world of native plant conservation began in earnest with after separating from the Navy and buying a home with a small wooded lot in 2017. This quickly led to the realization that an abundance of invasive species, impacts of unsustainable suburban landscaping practices, and devastating effects of rampant deer overpopulation are devastating our woods and green spaces. We all can feel that pain, right? Adrian's desire to create an outlet for localized environmental education and a business focused to associating with existing nonprofits. And a business focused legacy for his young children led to Be American's independent consultancy model, as opposed to associating with existing nonprofits. This passion for environmental issues is grounded in faith, motivated by patriotism, and tempered with the need to think global but act local to achieve measurable impact. Please welcome Adrian, and he's going to talk to us about herbaceous perennials. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome. Thank you. So I've been coming to these for as long as they put them back on after COVID, and they're wonderful. And I'm just frustrated that I can't be in the other ones right now. So I'm gonna have to watch the other breakout sessions that I missed later. That was a long intro. It's just a nice way of saying that I do a little bit of everything. From a consultancy perspective, I try to grow my plants from seed that seed that I collect and harvest on my own property. And do garden design and install, invasive species management, removal for clients. And we'll also support all the local profit non-profit groups as well. But only one person right now, and I hope to one day have my kids be the future employees of it. So that's where the focus is and why I didn't do an actual nonprofit versus a business. So we're going to be focusing today on herbaceous perennials for the suburban yard, specifically some of the techniques and strategies that you can utilize to have a yard that is both ecologically beneficial as well as aesthetically pleasing to yourself, while also not upsetting or angering your local community, your HOAs, et cetera, et cetera. It's a balancing act. Some people have a much tougher situation than others. I do not live in an HOA, but I still have some neighbors who maybe sometimes ask me questions or give me side glances, that sort of thing. So we'll talk a little bit about that aspect as well. Okay.
Thank you. Let me try one.
All right. Maybe because we had to restart it.
I don't know. It's weird. Oh, I don't see the
it was working just a few minutes ago, right before we started.
Make sure it's in. Try that again.
Oh.
Maybe put it on the side. Yeah, well, that's what.
It was working like literally
that it's not
just 2 minutes ago.
Yeah.
Just gonna move down.
Sorry.
Do this now.
Can you hear it? All
All right, so I'm just gonna,
right, I will get there. Yep.
okay, so here's our agenda overview, sort of standard briefing format, the things that we're gonna talk through. Definitions, why perennials, the concept of right plant, right place, some of the sort of overview principles of designing a garden. You can obviously get someone to do it for you, but everyone here is also capable of doing their own garden design. A little bit of appreciation and love for things that aren't just a flower, how to achieve year-round interest, where to get your plants, some of the constraints that we all face in our suburban gardens, and then dealing with hostile HOAs or unfriendly neighbors. What does perennial succession gardening mean in your home garden versus some other formats? Educational side options, valuable tools, websites, applications, and then just if we have time, some of my favorite pollinator plants. Okay, here we go.
It is working.
Cool. All right, so why are we here? We all want to get better. We all want to learn. We all want to be a positive, effective force for change in our local community. Few definitions of terms we'll be using throughout. So herbaceous are just the plants with flexible green stems, with few to no woody parts. So I will literally call a shrub or a sapling like a woody. That's how I have them categorized on my spreadsheets. Those are woodies. Perennials, plants that die back seasonally but produce new growth in the spring, so they go dormant and then they come growing back, as opposed to an annual where they grow very vigorously through the year and then they die. But they also reproduce very heavily, so you're gonna have lots of seeds. So an herbaceous perennial is one of these plants right here. Ecotype, genetically distinct population of plants, animals, or organisms. Allelopathy is a phenomenon where one organism produces biochemicals to influence another. In the suburban garden, that we'll typically see this where some plants, whether invasive or native, will discourage the growth of other plants, which is a survival trait. And then cultivar, I think we already covered that pretty well in the previous brief, but cultivated variety, whether that's hybridized or selective, those terms are generally interchangeable. There's generally perceived to be negative benefits of utilizing cultivars, but there are some unique specific circumstances within the constraints of a suburban garden where you might want to consider utilizing them. So why utilize perennials in your garden? Longer term garden planning. So if you have a vision, your garden, of where you want to eventually get to, you should really consider utilizing perennials because they're going to keep coming back. And they will save you money over time versus someone who is going every spring and then every fall, like planting annuals. Maybe they're planting mums in the fall or whatever. Or, if there are native equivalents that you really like, that's a consideration as well. That these are typically less aggressive than some of the native annuals. Trying to think of a few examples. Partridge pea, wonderful native annual. I love it. It's beautiful, but it is super aggressive. And most of your native annuals are not going to be quite as aggressive. Generally more ecological benefits than your annuals. You can utilize the seed heads as food sources for your birds in the winter, and the pith stems for pollinators that overwinter. They'll, especially like 2-3 years in, they'll really start to utilize that. So generally they're, I think, more adaptable to suburban landscaping. Right plant, right place. What is this concept? You'll hear these terms a lot. I didn't create any of these terms. Basically, it's you might have a vision for your specific property and your site, but you have to start thinking about all these other factors. So how much sun exposure do you have? The soil type, the moisture level. Look at your site during a major rain event. Like when it's raining really, really bad, 1+ inches in an hour, that's the perfect time to get outside, maybe, under an umbrella at least, and look and see how does the water flow topographically across your site. Because that's going to impact what plant you can plant there where. Proximity to heat sources such as dark pavement. If you're right next to a high traffic, dark paved road, there are certain plants that you don't want to put next to that and adjacent to that. Same thing, foundation. So if you have like a concrete foundation on your property that is in full sun, direction facing like due south, right? So it gets that morning east all the way through the setting, west sun. Any plant that you put in that foundation is gonna have, within 3 to 5 feet of that concrete foundation is gonna have radiating heat on it all throughout the day and at least 3 hours in the evening. So that's consideration. Heliopathic neighbors such as black walnut, size of the planted area. Do you have enough room for the plants that you envision to actually grow in that space, or is it gonna become super crowded very quickly? Density of plantings and root competition. Root density can be a good thing because it helps keep your plants vertical, creates more structure. But if you have too many species in one area, then there's going to be loss of the visual aesthetic element. So many natives are adaptable. They can grow just about anywhere. So they're very adaptable. Even if that's not the ideal condition, you could probably grow them, but it might not be optimal. They might not actually reproduce as they could or have as nice blossoms as they possibly could, be as healthy as they possibly could. So finding the right place for the right plant, right place. All right, garden design steps. Again, you can always go and find someone else to do this stuff for you, right? Like, I'm not gonna try and tell you, like, don't hire me, or don't go on your local CVLP website, whatever. There's plenty of landscape designers who can do this step for you, but this is all about education and empowering people too. Like, don't get overwhelmed by this. It's really not that hard. So on the top right there, you can see some of those pretty, very beautiful graphic design tools that folks you will utilize to create a garden design plan. And you can certainly go out and get one of those expensive subscription-based software applications that has to be updated regularly and needs a pretty high-end modern computer and you have to pay fees for it. Or if you're not interested in going that route, you can just do everything in PowerPoint or even like on a piece of paper, right? Just some line graphing paper. You don't have to get high tech. The important thing is that you can visualize your space, that somewhat approximates the dimensions of your site, and that you have a long-term plan that you're building out. So the first step in doing a garden design, at least from my perspective, is understanding your own objectives and working to develop a long-term vision. So a lot of times I'll go and talk to a client and be like, well, where do you see this space being in a year from now, or 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Very rarely do I get an answer at all. A lot of people don't know. They haven't thought about it. They just haven't put the time and thought into visualizing that. And so, obviously, like, I can help someone down that journey, but that's really something that you as the homeowner should be thinking about. What do you want that space to look like down long term? And what are your priorities, your personal priorities? Do you love birds? Do you love pollinators? Do you value floral, the scent element of your garden? Like, what is it that are your key priorities? And then work backwards from there. You need to measure and understand, like, pretty accurately what your dimensions are that you have to work with. So get one of those very long slide measures. I have one of those walking type of measures, and those are super useful. As you're doing it, you're charting everything out. You can use your property plat that's online to really sort of zoom in. Use Google Maps or ArcGIS or whatever tools that you are comfortable using, but you don't have to be high tech. You can just take general measurements, be as accurate as you can, and then be consistent about using those same measurements as you utilize the garden design process. Don't start out in meters and then like try to convert to feet, and then you can make mistakes down the road. So just be consistent. Look for pictures and inspiration. If you don't know what your vision is, go to any of these gardens that we've been talking about, any of the places that the previous presenter, anyone else that you see here has mentioned. There's so many gardens in this area that are public and accessible where you can get that inspiration. See something that you like, identify the plants there, the conditions, and what can you replicate on your site. And then consider varying like your heights, your structure, your growth habits of the site, of your garden design. So there's a lot of literature out there about the value of different heights to birds, of course. How birds need an understory, lots of wildlife needs, some area to hide underneath in all seasons, not just in winter. But aesthetically, that also helps visually break things up for you or anyone just walking past your yard. If it's all the same height, all the same color, then even if it's not a true monoculture of this one species, it has the appearance of that. So try and break things up by structure, by color, by height, by growth habit. And then, intentional design cues. That's kind of a nebulous term, but basically it's including anything that will subconsciously indicate to an outside observer who doesn't know anything about this stuff that this isn't just some weedy area that you have let grow, right? Like you have been intentional in your garden design. Maybe you just mow your grass through the area, or maybe you actually put like paving stones somewhere, or you have signage, or it's very clearly delineated with rocks or wood, or even just the plants that you're using themselves, that this is an intentionally designed space. And adding linear concepts like repeating plants across a certain section can help subconsciously cue people onto that intentionalism. Oh, I'll just pause and say, if you have questions, go ahead and speak up, man. Like we'll knock your question out as long as you're helping us stay on time. Not everything's flower. Oh, yes.
I wanted to label my call, because my neighbor said, is that a weed? But the names have weed in them, like Joe Pye. So that's kind of tricky.
Yeah, I just call it Joe Pye or butterfly weed. I know that Doug Talman has tried to rename butterfly weed's common name to like Monarch's Delight or something like that. So,
Good idea.
yeah, it's a common problem. I tried to either do some combination of not leaving off weed or just doing the Latin name as well. Yeah. Okay. Not everything is flower, and that's okay. So I personally believe that sedges, rushes, and grasses are vastly underutilized in suburban gardens. We had lots of examples of maybe some of the more rare versions of those species in the last brief. And he challenged us to, hey, try growing as well. Yes, but it's also really hard to find local ecotype seeds for the species that y'all just briefed out, right? So Virginia doesn't have a really robust seed network right now. There's a lot of organizations working to develop that seed industry at present, but it's not there yet. So for the time being, we kind of have the species that we have available to us to work with. So use those, like the carex as an example. There's whole species of carex, and Mount Cuba research trials have shown some of them to be really, really effective in home garden environments. So some of those are more commercially available than others. I think Carex pennsylvanica, as an example, is like at every single nursery now. It might not be your favorite, right? So, but find something that's equivalent to it that can provide that kind of filler and an additional structure and different color type than the perennial flowers. Vines, huge aesthetic impact from vines if your site can support it. Not everyone has a nice trellis frame that they can grow up on, or a nice long fence line that will support some vines. So your site may not be able to support them, but there's options, right? Vines, there's so many wonderful species of vines. Some of them produce food, most of them produce great flowers and attract hummingbirds, things of that nature. So try and use those. If you have any shade at all, partial shade to full shade, you need ferns. Like, get ferns. They're tough to find in most commercial nurseries. I'll be honest, like it can be tough to find your native ferns. But go out of your way to put ferns into your garden, because they do so much that is underappreciated. They support so many different species, and they're just multi-season interest. They're fantastic. Tall native grasses, there's more than just a little blue stem. There's quite a few species out there. Of course, I brought a little blue stem here, but you do have options beyond that. Yes. Anyone out there in virtual land? They might have just not muted their mics. Low ground covers. So those are the filler plants that connect your garden elements together. So especially in the spring, when some of your perennials are still just starting to emerge from growth, there's a lot of low ground covers that can provide that kind of connective tissue or matrix from one planted area to another. You can utilize them as a defining border in your gardens, or you can just do a monoculture of one particular ground cover species itself because they are so impactful. Yes, ma'am.
I planted Pachysandra a long time ago, and now I'm really regretting that and trying to get rid of it. Is there a native ground cover that can like overpower Pachysandra?
So first of all, you could replace it with Allegheny spurge, which is our native Pachysandra. It's not as, I don't think they would overpower the invasive Japanese Pachysandra that you're referring to.
Mhm.
I had the same problem when I moved into my property. There was multiple sections of invasive Japanese Pachysandra. And so I combated it by hand pulling, a combination of hand pulling as well as layering cardboard boxes after I'd removed all the tape from them and wood chips. The problem with that is if they're near roots, tree roots, you're gonna have some amount of impact on those trees from messing around with the roots. There's gonna be a compaction or denying some amount of precipitation, aeration to the tree roots. So there's always a pro and con, and the least impactful thing that you can do is to go in, especially after a rain event, and hand pull as much as you can, because so much of that root mass is below the soil layer surface, and just keep up with it for like 2 or 3 years. And then they should be, air quotes, pretty much defeated after that.
Okay.
But the roots of those things, and even if like I've found bits of them that I threw away, and then all of a sudden, like a year later, they're still growing that over where I threw them,
Yeah.
So just be careful with those.
Thank you.
It's a common problem. Ground covers. There's so many options. Use it as a filler to link and connect different areas of your garden. A living ground cover is always better ecologically than a non-living ground cover. So I love arborist wood chips. I love leaving the leaves. I love rock gardens, even like using rocks in certain situations can be good. But a living ground cover is better than all of this for many different reasons. But finding the right plant for the right place is key. Flowering versus non-flowering, which is your preference? Do you want to see an evergreen or deciduous style? Do you want edible fruit from your ground cover, or any kind of specific butterflies that you want to be a host plant for, or do you want them to track hummingbirds? So these are all the considerations that you think of as you're developing your plant species list in your garden. So here's a few examples just from my own. I don't take pictures of clients' properties unless they specifically permit me to. And I didn't really have the time leading up to this. So every picture that I'm going to use is either from my own garden or from my church's garden, which I developed and planted. Here's one example of a ground cover option, a combination of Sedum ternatum and moss phlox in April and May timeframe, while I'm still waiting for the other perennials that are planted in that garden bed to come up. So that garden bed has a number of different perennials as well as pinkster azaleas in it. So you've got that early season contrast, lots of pollination occurring. I've seen hummingbird, clearwing hummingbird moths frequent those, as well as actual hummingbirds, and just all around lots of pollinator activity. I prefer to have multiple species in one area as opposed to a single monoculture, but here's some other examples where you might want to have just a single monoculture. Common blue violet, I think a lot of people consider it to be a weed, particularly in their grass turf, but it has extremely high early season pollinator value to our emerging pollinators as they're coming out of hibernation. Since it is one of the first things to bloom. It's host to fertility butterfly larvae, meaning they actually eat them. And you can eat them too. So common violets, so you can use them in salads. I think they taste good. I'm not gonna pull them out of the areas that are my designated garden areas, but like if I see some in the turf grass, and yeah, sure, why not? They spread easily by seed and by rhizomatically. So All you really had to do is pull out the stuff that's not common violets, that you don't want, and these will fill in and take over. So they make a great garden edge, and that early season impact is awesome. There's so many different options. MGMB, Master Garden Northern Virginia has, a wonderful list, Plant Natives, wonderful list of different ground covers. These are just examples from my own garden. And then ferns. If you have shade, ferns are always the answer. Here's an example of a creek near my property, adjacent forest undergrowth. Lots of, I've identified like 4 or 5 different fern species in this area, as well as whitewood asters, deer tongue grass, young tree saplings. But the ferns are really the thing that dominate the vegetative state. That's the eye catcher to me, and they host so many different species again. Okay, vines. They can be a centerpiece garden addition. So meaning like that is the thing in your garden that draws the eye to it. The way you can achieve this is if you have a central arbor trellis, then you can put a planter pot on either side or plant them directly in the ground adjacent to it. If you have a fence or other structure that runs through the main portion of your garden, then the vines can become the central aspect aesthetically to that. There's also a number of commercial structures that are available on different websites and on Amazon, where it's basically like a tall vertical structure with them that they can grow up in through. You just have to have a large enough pot if you don't want to plant them directly in the ground. And then you had to manage it and trim it and whatnot. But you can almost like create, I like to create like, I call them mini trees, mini tree vines. You intertwine the vines, and then seasonally the vines will become almost woody along that central part. You see a lot of this with, oh gosh, it'll come to me later. But you'll see that a lot, particularly in nurseries, where they've almost turned vines into a small tree. And you can do that yourself. I would not allow them to grow directly on your house or on sheds, because they can be, most of the vines can be damaging, especially to paint, or if you have some of that synthetic siding on your house, then it can damage that as well. And then maybe not such a consideration to Virginia always, but with climate change and droughts and stuff, you might want to start looking into the flammability ratings of plants as well within the defensible structure of your home. As we had a really bad drought last year, and there were some wildfires, so that might be something that we consider moving forward as the climate changes. Is what kind of plants do you have inside the defensive perimeter of your home? Most of our native vines have extreme flammability ratings. It's not something that I really take a whole lot of worry about, but it is something to consider, especially if you're against an area that doesn't have much, precipitation. Oh, and that's an example of passion flower vine. They do attract bees. They smell amazing. And they produce fruit, so it's one of my favorite vines. Your grasses, sedges, and rushes. Kind of already explained the visual impact of this. They do a really great job of absorbing water during major rain events, because the roots act like a sponge. They have very deep roots, which not only helps to mitigate soil erosion, but it also helps mitigate the impacts of extreme precipitation or drought on them, as well as the rest of your garden. Great ground cover for wildlife. Seed heads can be food. Very effective in mass plantings, particularly if you're on a budget, right? So you grow a bunch of plugs of grasses, sedges, or rushes, whatever species is best for your site. There are a whole bunch of plugs for very little cost, and then you fill in that entire space. And now you don't have to use grass sod or just let the weeds take over, right? You got something that's better. Yes, ma'am.
Some sedges in my yard. Do they need to be trimmed like on the top at a certain season?
That's gonna be your preference. I've got some Carex along one side of my yard. For whatever reason, a few of them like to get like waist high, and then it just looks odd compared to the ones that are like, yay high. And so I'll lop them all off, sort of make sure that they're the same height. But if you don't have that height variability, if like they're pretty uniform and consistent, then aesthetically it's your own preference. Yeah.
Does it help them grow better, more if they are trimmed or not? Is it just?
That's a good question. Certainly if like you're talking about normal pruning of a perennial, I would encourage that, especially the Chelsea chop. But, I don't know that I've read anything that looks specifically at, grasses and sedges and rushes to see if that has a major impact on them or not. I'll take that as a look up. Okay, also, I love how these look in windy conditions like Carex pennsylvanica. That swaying, or purple love grass, or any of the other ones that have like lots of a very flowing element to it, looks amazing when we have some of these high wind conditions that we do in Virginia. Okay, year-round interest. This should always be a goal you're working towards. Having something that is aesthetically pleasing no matter what time of year it is. You can achieve this by having not just flowering perennials, but also all the other plants that we've talked about. Think about developing a rotating seasonal pictogram or whatever of the bloom periods, and then having some of these sort of more natural earth color tones, as well as some evergreen plants for the winter. Here's anything, I'm going to show a few pictures from more or less the same section of my yard. It's a dedicated pollinator garden in my backyard. So here's one angle, utilize the stair casing and that sort of rock and bird bath in the background as a frame of reference for all the other pictures. But this is early spring, like maybe late April timeframe. All these pictures are from last year, so this is over the course of 1 year. All right, so this is more like May into June, so early summer. This is like June, July, so you see a lot of different colors there. Early goldenrods starting to come in, rudbeckias in the background. You maybe can't see as well, but there's milkweeds. Okay, now we're getting into late summer, early fall. So this is, I think, from September, maybe late August or early September. The solidagos are really blooming strongly there. Okay, this is into the fall now, so like October, and the asters have really taken over, still with some goldenrods blooming as well. And then winter, and I leave everything in place, and when I walk down those stairs, there's going to be 100 birds, little birds that fly out from underneath there. And when there's snow, snow is wonderful because you can see the visual evidence of the birds, where they are, what they're eating, where they're nesting, how many there are. And the snow also does a wonderful job of insulating the soil, making it so it doesn't get too cold, for all the, your pollinators that are nesting underneath there. And it does a good job of cold stratifying the seeds that are there as well, so that they will have high, regrowth rates in the following season.
Adrian, can I
Yes,
just
ma'am.
ask, how long has this garden been there? Like a couple of years or?
We'll talk a little bit more to that in managing succession part of it, but I think I started this in 2017. And the plants that I started out with, not all of them are still there, and then I've got more that I didn't start out with initially. So be flexible in your plans. Okay, sourcing your perennials. All right. Everyone starts their journey somewhere, right? So most of us, probably our first time like getting into gardening, we went to a commercial nursery, right? And maybe we didn't know what native plants are, but there might have been a native plant section. We're like, oh, what's that? That sounds interesting to me. And you go over there and you grab 1, 2, 3 of these guys, right? And then you've got 3 plants for, you probably just paid $50 for 3 plants. And you got 1 example of each species. Eventually, you start to get a little bit better understanding of what's native to your ecoregion. So the Mid-Atlantic, when you're talking about the Piedmont versus the coast, is it native to Virginia, to your specific county? And then you're talking about like local ecotype, grown from seed, no herbicides, no pesticides, as ecologically beneficial as you can, with as few fossil fuel emissions as possible in their creation. Where do you get the plants from is very important, not just for the health of the plant, but also the bigger picture. So having said all that, There is a hierarchy of ecological benefits and environmental sustainability from where we get them, where we source them. In general, plants that are sourced locally, meaning you drive not very far at all, or you grow them yourselves, are better for the environment than plants that you order wholesale from 3 states north of you. You know, and I'm just gonna make that as a blanket statement. They might, you know, the wholesaler might have native species that you can't find in your local commercial nurseries. But to move them, one, to produce at that now scale is very intensive, energy wise. And then to physically move them or mail them to you utilizes a lot of fossil fuels as well. So if at all possible, when at all possible, get locally grown, local ecotype from seed plants. That's not always possible. So there's always exceptions and considerations made, which is why you should go to plant sales in our area, local plant sales, because you're going to be much more likely to find the plants that you're looking for that are in your garden design if you keep going to all of those once they start in April. And I'll just say also that medium and small size nurseries are less likely to utilize mass spraying of herbicides and pesticides than the large wholesalers. There's a lot of different reasons for that. That's a blanket statement, but you're less likely to have those harmful chemicals introduced to your plants at the smaller production level than at the larger one. Okay, typical suburban garden constraints. Home construction. So when our homes are, when the forest is clear cut to produce our homes, and I say that because even though my home was built in, I think, 1982, it was still grown, like trees were still torn down, right? Not only did they have to make space for the home, they had to maybe potentially make space for a septic drainage field, for utilities, for driveway, particularly if the home is placed further back in the lot. All these different things. You could probably do an estimate of how many trees were actually torn down on your property. Mature trees are torn down on your property, working backwards based on the density of your area. But regardless, that whole process results in a lot of soil compaction, as well as in some circumstances, that top layer of like the top 5 feet of soil being stripped away. Sometimes they reuse it or resell it. Sometimes it just ends up in a dump. It depends on the construction company itself. But regardless, your property will then be regraded in this wonderful, nutrient deficient, poor quality red clay grading soil. And the overall size that you have to work with, for an actual garden space might be very restricted. Some people will have the luxury of having more gardening space than others. And then you might have too much shade, based on the location of other properties to your own, or too much. So it all depends. Insufficient or excess of precipitation. Some areas, particularly when you're getting in the city, they might not have really good stormwater management systems, right? So then all that rainwater is being collected on the roofs adjacent to you and flows through your property. And that can be a consideration or constraint. And then I'm going to go ahead and add in, even though we've got a dedicated portion, HOAs. I don't live in an HOA intentionally, but some people, that's where you have to. And that can be, in general, a constraint for some people. But all these constraints can be overcome with the right plant, right place mindset. So understanding the site you have, your vision, your goal, your objectives, figuring out what will work best there. All right, so we might all want to have this, a wonderful woodland forest filled with bluebells. I'll give a plug for the Merrimack Farm Garden Bluebell Festival on 7 April. So if you haven't been to the Bluebell Festival, please do. It is worth it. But your HOA says that your yard has to look like this. Yeah. So what do you do? How do you deal with the mean, or maybe it's wrong, the less than encouraging neighbors or HOAs that are maybe a little restrictive? If your name happens to be Karen, or you have this hairstyle, this is all in good fun. Please don't take offense or report me. How do you deal with them? First of all, kill them with kindness, right? Like, just be nice. Don't get defensive. you know, some people are more interested than others in learning about what their neighbors are doing. Yes, ma'am.
I'm gonna say, plan to get on the HOA board and on the architectural control committee.
Oh, there's some long-term planning, like, yeah, find out when the openings are coming up, the elections, start, you know, doing some house of cards sort of stuff,
Oh, yeah.
get in there. I like it. Kill them with kindness and patience. I didn't do it. Educational signage and having like those. We're here, there's a whole bunch of vendors with lots of free pamphlets and literature. At the end of this, if they still have any left out, grab as much as you can for yourself. And then hold on to that, bundle it up together or even staple it up together. And then when next time you're talking to a neighbor who has questions or an HOA member, give them some free literature. Just have some on hand and give them some free literature. You know, you might not be able to win them over in conversation, but if they have something in their hand that they can look at later, you'd be surprised how often a little bit of education can change people's minds. Not always, but sometimes. You can't guarantee they'll read it, but if it has pretty pictures, they're more likely to look at it. Everyone has different values in response to different arguments. So some people, you know, even if they have a lawn that's all grass and they're, you know, the Karen on the committee, they might really love birds or butterflies. So leverage that angle, leverage what it is that they value. If they have small dogs, small kids or dogs, what's the difference, right? They both eat their own. If they have either of those things, then they might be more receptive to arguments against herbicides because, you know, if you ever look up what's actually in the True Green herbicide application, it's a lot of toxic stuff and it's not good for pets or for kids, right? So they might be receptive to that. Personal liberty. Lots of people, especially certain more rural areas, really value their individual liberties. And so that might be an argument that they're receptive to as well. Well, you know, this is my land, this is my property. Why are you dictating what I can do with it? You know, some people are receptive to that, others not so much. So just figure out what it is after talking to them nicely. And then leverage their values. People love to talk about themselves as well, so ask them questions about themselves and their values, and they'll give you more information. Most HOAs, yes, ma'am.
Oh, so I don't live in an HOA, but I have a wonky looking yard at this point.
Uh-huh.
And I have a fig tree. And so I pick a bunch of figs and I deliver a bunch of figs to all the neighbors because I figure, you know, they're gonna look at the funky yard and they're gonna go, oh, that's a crazy lady with the fig.
There you go. Wonderful, wonderful approach. I do the same thing, but with venison, my neighbors. HOAs often have landscaping guidelines that are published online. Sometimes there's like a membership paywall behind there or whatever. But if you live there, then you should have access to it. Enforcement of those guidelines or, you know, whatever the rules are, rules for the HOA can be subjective, right? So who's enforcing it? How strictly are they enforcing it? That can work in your favor if you have a developed personal relationship with those individuals. So, you know, find some, I'm not gonna say lawyer the language up, but if you think that there's some room in there for interpretation, leverage those personal relationships that you have now developed to get them to maybe enforce you differently. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I have two further questions about the HOAs. I am lucky enough to be in charge of landscaping for an HOA for 15 townhouses in a village in Middle. Okay, village in Middletown. And two things are driving this right now. A 1982-84 landscape that's dying. Its shrub layer and others are just maxing out past the line. And its maintenance cost of these common areas is $13,000 this year. That focuses the mind of the homeowners association. They're very enthusiastic about all the operations, but I need the economics of making the conversion, and we started, but making the conversion to all these beds into a native landscape, and particularly the economics of how we can avoid plastic bags of black mulch in the season, and photographs from HOAs that made this transition in there. I need the kind of economic aesthetics of those who are farther along rather than we don't have landowners.
Sure, I'm hesitant to say blanket wise that like going native is always cheaper. It can be, right? If your HOA is one where they have like crews coming out every couple of months to replace beds with annuals and add mulch, then yes, obviously utilizing living ground cover of perennials and arborist wood chips that you got from Chip Shop for free is gonna be a more viable, economically sustainable option. But there's a range, right? And so.
They documented it, was, I guess,
Well,
what they share.
I can't say for sure whether or not it is. I don't service personally. I don't have a contract to service any HOAs, but I'll bet the literature exists. And if not, you could, with little effort, probably produce something that makes the economic argument for it.
I think the master gardener, I think some of the master gardeners in Prince William County have done that.
But I would say the extension office or staff, Valerie's doing an HOA presentation later today.
Yeah, I signed up for it, and I was
Good.
gonna ask it there, so I just didn't know if Adrian had any anecdotal.
Okay,
But it's a huge way to transform if
Yeah.
they're paying to maintain beds that need not be
Yeah.
invasive, whatever.
And I've certainly used that argument in my church, like, why are you having guys come out here and mow and blow and do all that sort of stuff when you don't need to? And yes, ma'am.
Well, and that was my question, because I'm also like here partially because my yard I'm good with, but trying to get my church to change its mindset, and that's very hard, and so, perhaps if you had any suggestions for research to do with your church.
Yeah, but I have not been 100% successful. So we still have whole sections of our church where, they spent the money to put in these Japanese barberry, and had crews, they paid full commercial price for non-native shrubs or what have you from a commercial nursery, paid crews to install and all that sort of stuff. So then the mind says, well, we paid however many thousands of dollars for this, we're not just gonna tear it up. And it's a little bit of shifting mindset too, because not everyone, it's not always a value or priority for them to worry about the landscaping. So, at my church, at least, I've been successful in taking, parking islands or sections of the church that were not being used and converting rather than taking an area that has already some landscaping and just redoing it. But, different people are receptive to different things. Perennial succession, so, how do you get a blooming period that, continues throughout the year? And how do you get plants that come back year after year? This is directly from the Plant Nova Natives Guide, so if you don't have all that already, this is a wonderful example. It's not all inclusive, these are just some example species. All you have to do is, once you have your list of plants for your site that you want, start doing a little spreadsheet, color code out, the colors themselves and the bloom periods. It doesn't have to be super complicated. You don't have to get some high-end visual graphic or whatever. Just do something that is easy to modify and works for you. For me personally, I like to have at least a month of overlap bloom periods, but that might not be achievable with the site that you have, with the dimensions of the space that you have. But even the small site, I think Nancy Berlin is giving a lecture right now on container gardening. So even the small site, you can throw some containers in there, and that will add a little extra color and bloom period during that space. And you can rotate them that way too. So if every garden begins with an imperfect plan, don't wait until you have the perfect plan to start, right? I think a lot of people make that mistake, is like, it's too much, or it's too much money, or it's too much time, or I just don't have the mental capacity to really dig into all that entails to get to the perfect garden that I ultimately want. Don't wait for perfect. Just get started, even if you don't have all the answers or all the money yet. Adhering to your long-term gardening vision to achieve this long-term constant bloom will require attention and care. I think it's a misnomer or misunderstanding a lot of people have, misconception that native plants or native perennial plants are less work. They're not less work, it's different work, right? So you still have to do a bit of management of them. If there's disease, you still have to address those issues or concerns. So it takes time, it takes discipline, and especially if you're trying to achieve a long-term vision. All right, so examples of my church here. So this is from 2021, fall 21, I believe. Yep, fall 21. So empty parking lot islands or underutilized parking lot islands. So again, the grading soil, that's not very good. Lots of weeds, all that sort of stuff. So we go in there, plant in the fall. All right, so spring of the following year. And after we plant, we applied about 1 to 3 inch layer of arborist wood chips as well. That not only helps to further settle soil, which was disturbed, but it also helps prevent wind-borne or bird-borne invasive plant seeds from getting in. It helps to insulate the roots of the newly planted herbaceous perennials. And then it also adds a little bit of additional nutritional content to the soil type too. I always advocate for mass plantings. So what I mean by that is a minimum of 3, but preferably 5 or 8 even, or 9. So here's an example of one tray. So this tray has 3, it's a tray of 15 individual 1-quart pots. It's 3 species, so 5, 5, 5. If you have a limited budget, you're gonna go into a nursery or go to a supplier with a limited budget, rather than getting like 5 species with just a few numbers of each. I'd rather you get 2 species with more of each. Yeah, that's going to increase the overall survivability rate of your plants when you have mass plantings. It's going to increase root density, which is going to make them be more erect and lean against each other. The roots will grow together better. You'll have better cross-pollination, so they'll have better flowers. More seeds will be produced, all around better visual aesthetic impact. So that summer of 22, so this is into October of 22. Okay, there we go. All right, so then 2023, here's an example of 2022 to 2023. You see blue mist flower. Now you're seeing some of those asters and annuals coming in that I did not plant. Those are coming up on their own. So this is, we're gonna talk about succession gardening. You really have to, if there's stuff you don't want, especially annuals, you really have to pay attention and manage it. Okay, so big transformation from August of 21, what it looked like before, until July of 23. So just about 2 years later. You notice how easily Rudbeckias will predominate an area. Also, there's a lot of little blue stem there too. Okay, November 21 to July 23. Oh, and yes, those are purple coneflower, so don't judge me. You gotta have some compromises when you're dealing with like church groups like that, HOAs, whatever. All right, educational signage options. There's a lot of options. You can make something yourself, which can be cool, right? Express yourself. There's the high end sort of top right chart, or this one where it's like educational signage, interpretive signage, or whatever. Those typically are pretty expensive, but they're good options. Then there's some of the yard certification programs like National Wildlife Federation, Monarch Waste Station, Audubon at Home. All of those have their own signs, and it's something that you can display to your neighbors. Our church has the National Wildlife Federation Sacred Grounds designation, so we've got that sign displayed. But whatever you have, whatever you do, just make sure that it's not off-putting and that it's intentional, that they can see that you're clearly doing something deliberately. All right, tools, websites, applications. I think we've covered most of these already in some of the other briefings. This is every single one of these and more are also on my resources page on my website. But one thing that I really love, I don't think gets talked about enough, is the Mount Cuba, Delaware research trial site that they have. Super informative. I don't have the time or capacity to rack and stack some of these different species, and they've done it for me. So I think that's awesome. Of course, you know, our songas, plant Perennium, Plant Nova Native, CBLP, all these have tools that are useful for you. Yes, ma'am.
We've got about 5 minutes left.
Okay.
Yeah, we have people with questions online, so I know we've gotten a lot of
Okay.
questions. So you're live.
All right, so go ahead, folks online. I'm just gonna slowly click through some of my favorites.
Check the chat.
What are those?
So this was a question from Donna Stoffer online. When you leave stems of plants to overwinter, do you cut them in the spring, and if so, when?
I do tend to cut, or at least if it's in a garden that's like at my church or something, I will cut some portion of them, depending on if they're at the edge closest to the parking lot or something like that. Like, I don't want to leave huge, like some of these, this is purple as usually. If I leave this kind of a stem right at the sidewalk, where people are walking to and from church, like, that's not gonna work. It's gonna topple over onto them, and it's just not gonna look good. So it sort of depends, but if this is in the middle of it, then yeah, we'll leave it in place, you know. But it's personal preference. The big thing is if you can leave some portion of it, at least 18 inches, for the pollinators to get into the nesting cavity. At least that's the current set of literature right now that I've seen. There might be some studies that come out to say a higher amount or lower, but what I've seen so far is that if you leave about 18 inches of stem, then that's sufficient for them.
Okay. Any other questions from our participants online?
Stop it.
I mentioned, Nuts for Natives is a website by the Native, Plant Nursery out in Hamilton, Virginia, and she has blogs based on her experience over the years. The one on ground covers, I just read, and it's really good. So it's nutsfornatives.com. It's really good.
And it's funny how all these different groups, especially when they put out an article or an infographic, it gets shared on all the different Facebook groups too. So you start seeing the same thing like 5 or 6 times. It's pretty awesome.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Bluebell, again, Bluebells, 7 April. Definitely go to the Merrimack Farm Bluebells Festival.
You don't find that white wood aster too aggressive?
It's funny, I saw an infographic the other day that, I think it might have been their song, The Compendium, where it's like breaking down all these different, sites and some plants that would work in that site based on whether it was full sun or part shade or full shade or dry or moist or whatever. And almost every single one of them, the whitewood asters was on there. And I was just like, yeah, that's so true. They are bullies. But man, I've not seen anything in October or November that is just covered. The only thing that might have as much support, broad spectrum pollinator use is the mountain mints I found. But and they're bullies too, you know. Like, you really had to manage those. New England aster, awesome one, can get a little tall, definitely benefits from the Chelsea shop. Yeah, there's your mountain mint left there. And there's several different kinds. Short tooth mountain mint, the muticum, it's definitely the most aggressive of them, in my opinion at least. Virginia mountain mint or some of the smaller growth habit ones are less aggressive, still provide a lot of ecological benefit. And all still smell really good, like they're still mints, right? So you can still crush them up. And I found too that lately I'm using them as a deer repellent. Not 100% effective, but if you plant it around the plants that you, like the shrubs that you don't want the deer to touch, then it has a little bit of a deterrent effect. So concluding graphics there, here's a couple examples of suburban garden interpretations of what a suburban garden might look like. I think the one on the right is a little bit more intentional. Some of the cues there. The one on the left is maybe a little messier, but either of them would work fantastically in a suburban garden. All right, any other questions? I know we're about out of time here. Yes, ma'am.
I would ask the New York, the aster that's scented, the beautiful one. Is it New York aster?
Aromatic aster?
Aromatic aster. And I'm under an HOA. They cut down a huge green ash tree. I mean, it was probably 80 years old. And the forester said, now 55,000 gallons of water are running down that hill, and our basement is at the bottom of that hill. So I planted as much as fast as I could to try to soak up some of that water. And I have left the flower heads on the aster because I'm thinking the birds might eat it. Winter's not over. But the HOA, of course, says no brown plants. So what would you do?
No brown plants?
No brown plants. I mean, they don't know. They're volunteers.
Yeah.
But I just found out that HOAs are actually a national association that lobby against, they lobby behind our backs.
So I would go and spend a little bit of time actually finding the in writing rules that says no brown plants, because trees are brown.
Right.
Most shrubs are brown, so I would, that sounds like someone's maybe doing a little subjective enforcement there. And
Cut
then,
the tops off of them, just
Yeah.
so they're not so obvious.
Yeah, they're really
To
tall,
the-
but that's where the flower heads are, that's where the seeds are, and that's why I left it, so the bird food, my neighbors don't pick up after their dogs, so I've seen rats, so I don't hang bird feeders. My bird food is on the stem.
great, thank you all for being so
Yeah, let's
attentive.
give Adrian a minute.